Tell me about the good
I
old
thought maybe
days.
for today's good old days, we could talk about Doctor Who in the 1980s. Basically, the show went a completely new direction
Hmm.
starting in the year 1980. Okay. You had that wonderful synthetic rock theme when it popped on, and
Yeah.
almost early CG it looked like, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and the new logo and everything, and this was like Doctor Who for a new decade.
Hmm.
I remember there
So,
were. Mhm.
I mean, I- if you're saying for the 1980s, you're probably talking about Jonathan Turner.
Yes, Jonathan Turner, John Nathan
Yeah.
Turner. Yes,
Yeah.
and yeah, I remember really digging Doctor Who in the '80s. I kind of got into it more so when TNG kind of had that first season, and I'm like, I'm done with Star Trek for a while. And then I was looking forward to the new Star Trek movie with the old crew coming out, and then it was Star Trek Five, and I was like, And so I started
Yeah.
getting into Doctor Who while I took a break from TNG. I got into it again later on. Okay, so
Sure.
just want to know whenever we talk about these crisis and fandoms and fans and
Yeah.
everything else, it's not just now. It's been going on all the time. Okay,
Yeah,
we're
that's
always
right.
fighting off different things. This
And
latest,
when you bring up Turner, okay, you're talking about. I mean, talking about him is kind of like talking about Stephen Moffat, where you're like, man, under his watch, we got some of my favorite Doctor Who and some of my least favorite Doctor Who. It
you're
really
right.
runs
You're right.
the whole gambit.
I mean, you could argue that Doctor Who in the '70s might, in some ways, was better because you had John Pertwee,
John
you had
Pertwee
you
was
had
great.
Tom Baker, you had Tom
Yeah,
Baker,
yeah.
brilliant episodes. Tom Baker carried that show so much. You know what I noticed in the Tom Baker era? You wouldn't get the regular villains all the time, like the Daleks or
Right.
Cybermen. Once in a blue moon, you'd get them, but that didn't matter because what you had replacing all that was still fascinating. Okay, so and
And I feel like you got some of the most quotable Doctor Who lines from the Tom Baker era
yeah.
too. You know.
But then John Nathan Turner takes over, and they made some changes to the show. For instance, the Doctor would always have to wear a standard outfit. There was no longer where Tom Baker
Yeah.
could change his
It
outfit
did
between
get it
movie and
get
stuff. Yeah,
well. We kind of with Tom Baker with the big floppy hat, big floppy fedora, and the long scarf. You kind of had the start of it there, right?
yeah,
And then, but then you go into another one of my favorite doctors. That's Peter Davison, right? And you get
yes.
things like the weird long coat with the celery stalk and the now you're starting to get the question marks, playing off the who thing, and it's like, okay, it's silly, but he was a great doctor. He really was. Some really great episodes. Not necessarily the best companions during that era, but
True.
you know,
Yeah, that was the issue with the Peter Davidson era was the fact that you had all of these. You had like three. I think it was like a standard was three companions at once for a while, right?
yeah,
Too many companions. The writers had to come up with excuses for why one of the companions couldn't. Oh, Nissa's got some alien fever or something. She has to stay in the TARDIS this episode because they couldn't keep having all four of them on screen at once because they would run out of things for like the third one to do, right, in the
right.
episode. What I thought
Not
was
to mention, they were working from their pool of British actors, and saying, okay, well, you're going to play an American and you're going to play an Australian, and they're like trying their level best to do the appropriate accents
oh
and going,
no, are you saying
aha,
Tegan
yeah,
wasn't Australian?
you know,
I don't know if she was. I knew that Perry wasn't an American, but we'll get to her later on. What I
Perry
found,
was gorgeous though.
no, she was. So the Peter Davidson era, I love that. He
Yeah,
might be my favorite Doctor, and that's saying a lot because we've had a lot of great Doctors. So not trying to poo-poo on any of the
true.
others either, but I did love that era. The cool thing about the Peter Davidson era is any episode it wasn't like you'd have like these long story arcs that would last the whole season. Like every episode was supposed to be a major story. Do you understand?
Right.
So something major could happen. I remember Earthshock stands out most of all. Remember Earthshock?
Yeah.
That was the episode where the Cybermen returned, and apparently over in England they didn't get to watch the reruns like we did. Okay, and I was watching on the DVD. The one guy was saying as a fan when he was a kid, he was like he'd only read about the Cybermen in like books and Doctor Who journals. He'd never seen them in an episode of the show.
That's
So,
wild. Well, but that's part of the way the syndication happened in England. Well, or their lack of syndication, I should say, because and that's also what indirectly led to the first, I was going to say 3 doctors, but potentially more. Their recorded episodes being lost because they'd play them the once and they didn't syndicate them, so they're like, well, we don't need to waste space, and these videotapes, holding something we're never going to play again. Because you could say now it was short-sighted, but from their point of view, it makes perfect sense. Legally speaking, they couldn't re-show them. They didn't have a syndication process in place back then.
No, they did not.
And so you're right. Even into the Peter Davison era, they didn't have reruns of these shows, and so it was not an easy thing to see. In fact, and this was true both in Britain and the United States. Sometimes the only times you would see certain episodes or series of episodes would be at conventions. You would go to conventions. Back in the 70s and 80s, conventions were a little bit different than they are now. You would have 2 or 3 rooms that I guess nowadays you'd call them panel rooms, but back then they were specifically for playing episodes of Doctor Who or Star Trek or something like that. And usually the draw was this was an episode that hadn't been seen in a long time or whatever.
I remembered, yeah.
That's how I saw a lot of Blake Seven, in fact, before I started seeing it on PBS.
The Colin Baker era starts.
Yeah.
You remember that? Actually, going back to Peter Davison, though, I did want to mention one thing. I thought he had the best last episode of any Doctor. That final episode of Peter Davidson.
Yeah.
They end up on that horrible planet with the robots and the androids, and they're like mining this drug that can keep people living forever, and it's almost like a twisted version of Phantom of the Opera, because you have the one guy that got scarred and living underneath, and he's having a fight with his old business partner, and it's a really dark episode.
It is.
And the impression I got from it is that he only found enough of the bat's milk to save Perry, and then he didn't have enough left for him, so he thought he was going to die right then and there. He wasn't going to regenerate. He's like, I might regenerate. I don't know. It feels different this time. Like he thought he would regenerate. And then you see all of his companions circling his head saying, don't die, Doctor. You mustn't die, Doctor. And then the Master shows up in the middle. No, dear Doctor, you must die. And it's a fascinating sequence. You can find
which, of course, makes for a great cliffhanger. And you don't know, is he coming back? Are they bringing the show back? Who's the new Doctor going to be? All this kind of stuff.
Well, we did find out at the end of that episode, though, because it was Colin Baker.
Oh, that's right.
So Colin Baker, you didn't care much for that, how he starts attacking his companion.
Yeah.
That didn't go well with a lot of people, actually.
And, we've had a lot of years to look at that and analyze it and go back to it. There's something to be said for authorial intent, right? But it wasn't done very well. But you almost have to go back to the Tom Baker to Peter Davison. How that was a very different regeneration there too, where you had this other entity, this proto in between Doctor that fuses with them, that facilitates the
regeneration process.
And there's still question about what they intended with that and what that was all about. But then the next transition is also difficult, and what they were trying to do was they were trying to make it so that there was some drama to it, so that you didn't always feel like, well, the Doctor can't die. He's just always going to regenerate. And I do think the one thing they did establish is, look, no. And if it wasn't clear then, it got cleared up in the Davies era when the doctor specifically says, "Oh, I absolutely can die. If I die, I die. That's it. But if I'm dying and I have the time, I have the ability to regenerate, and this is the trade-off." But yeah, so they were trying to inject that level of drama into it, but they did it very ham-fistedly, and it turned a lot of fans off for a long time. I know Nanette said she stopped watching Doctor Who after the first few episodes of Colin Baker. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of fell away from it about the same time, not necessarily for the same reason Nanette did, not because I actually had not seen a lot of Colin Baker's episodes. It was really hard because here in Chicago, we picked it up on WTTW Channel 11, the PBS channel, and it was like late night Sunday night, and it was not common for me to be able to stay up late and watch it. So I missed a lot of the Colin Baker era, not through any choice of my own, and just kind of, lost the momentum by the time Sylvester McCoy came along. I mean, I actually had a talk with Colin Baker when he was here in the States a couple of years back at Chicago TARDIS. And I just got to tell you, he's a heck of a nice guy. He really is. Yeah. He is totally not that doctor,
No, I think he had problems with some of the lines too.
Like he did.
He didn't like that outfit. He wanted to wear a suit. He said
that's what he said too. Yeah. And he said, every fan that I talk to, I feel like I have to apologize for what I did to the doctor. And I'm like, most of us have grown up understanding that you're an actor and you don't really have a choice. He goes, that's true. But I felt bad about it because I knew what I was doing at the time and it made me angry. I'm like, okay, so this guy totally gets it. And he has done so many things since leaving Doctor Who that have really endeared himself to the fans, including like working on, fan films actually, and stuff like that. He's made it very clear that he really does have a love for the whole concept of Doctor Who, and really would have done it differently had he had the choice to do it. But yeah, he felt very alienated by the production, and so he would not come back.
We get Sylvester McCoy later on, and some people they love that era. I'm not a fan. I remember being a kid watching this and thinking, I had issues with it. For starters, you can tell when you find out later on what was going on behind the scenes, the guy running the BBC had it in for Doctor Who. He wanted it gone.
Yeah.
So you can tell that the budgets are even lower than they've been before, okay?
Yeah.
And you can tell, and I know that they were doing their best, okay? I'm sure, I'm not picking on the writers behind the scenes. I'm sure they were doing everything they could. The trouble was when the show went off the air, I didn't know it had gone off the air.
Yeah.
I'm tuning into PBS next year. Where's the new slate of Doctor Who? There is none. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Then you find out a couple years later, that show got canceled ages ago, and like you don't know at the time.
Well, yeah. What happened was by the end of Sylvester McCoy, they did a fast one. They didn't actually cancel it. They just put it on hiatus and then
really?
never renewed it. And so in theory, it was never really canceled. But after you lose that much momentum, you kind of need a reboot, and that's what eventually in '96 leads us to, the reboot with Fox, which
didn't take
that's
off.
a whole nother story, and that's definitely getting us out of our '80s era.